This is Fetch once again, out of stock, the final story, part 2. Now just for a recap, our heroes, so to speak, had just stolen the plush trap chaser and are now trying to escape the security guards out of the mall. "We're dead," Raj said, but he was keeping pace with Oscar. "We're so incredibly dead." Oscar couldn't say anything. He could hardly process what his body was doing. His mind had completely left the building. Suddenly, Isaac swerved, and it only took Oscar a second to see why. Emerging from a restroom doorway to the right was a confused mall security guard, hiking up his pants, watching the scene in front of him unfold with slow recognition of the problem. Oscar and Raj sped past him as the guard behind them yelled, "Stop them!" The east entrance glowed like a beacon of safety, and Isaac burst through the door first, holding it while swinging his arm to Oscar and Raj. "Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up." Oscar and Raj raced through, and the boys ran like a speeding arrow, Isaac at the head, while they made a hard right toward the private eucalyptus grove. But the parking lot was a wide expanse of obstacles beyond the trees. Isaac hesitated, and Oscar took the lead, weaving past minivans and SUVs like they were playing a human arcade game, the obstacles in security uniforms likely to come out of every corner. Except it was still only the two voices Oscar could hear behind them, and when he ventured a brief look over his shoulder, it was indeed still just the two. And at last, the one from the restroom doorway looked like he was starting to run out of steam. "Get," he huffed between strides, "back here." "We're losing them, come on," Oscar finally said, his voice sounding like someone else's. It was like he'd left his body entirely, and this thieving, criminal escape artist had taken him over. He wasn't Oscar. In this moment, he wasn't anyone he recognized. "We're almost there," Raj gasped, and they all knew he meant the eucalyptus grove. The menthol air was upon them, and the strong smell coated the inside of Oscar's burning lungs. "That's private property," Oscar could hear the other security guard yell, but he sounded farther away now. It was almost like he was telling himself that, not Oscar, so he wouldn't have to chase the boys once they'd crossed the tree line. Oscar threw the box over the fence and followed it, tumbling to the ground and rolling through the leaves that had once begun to shed, now that fall was here. Isaac tumbled over the fence next, followed by Raj, and they took one more collective look through the slats in the fencing to confirm what Oscar already knew. The security guards had abandoned their pursuit, with the larger one resting his hands on his knees while he bent, huffing and spitting. The boys weren't done, though. It was private property, and they shouldn't be here either. But it was more than that. It was wrong. They knew everything about what they'd just done, especially what Oscar had done. Instead of facing that, he tried to outrun it. He ran all the way to his street, even as Raj and Isaac pleaded with him to slow down, that the danger was over, that he was being crazy. They pleaded angrily, in fact, and Oscar knew that maybe it was because he'd gotten them into this mess. He'd been the one to grab the chaser. He'd been the one to run like a bear was chasing him. He'd been the one to make them decide to run with him or leave him to his own terrible decision and all of its consequences. When they finally arrived at Oscar's house, lungs burning and necks sweating, their legs shaking hard enough to be useless, they collapsed on the floor of Oscar's small living room, splayed in a circle around the 3-foot-long box that was damp with perspiration and decorated with stuck-on leaves. "Technically, it wasn't stealing," Oscar said, the first to regain his breath and possibly his wits. "You're an idiot," Isaac said, and he meant it. "I left our money on the counter," Oscar said, but he knew it was laughable, and Raj punctuated that fact by laughing mirthlessly. "You're an idiot," Isaac said again, just to be sure it registered this time, and Oscar nodded. "Yeah, I know." This time they did all chuckle. Not quite a laugh, and none of them meant it, but it was enough for Oscar to know that even though they hated what he did, they didn't hate him. And besides, now they had a plush trap chaser regardless of how they got it. But now that he could catch his breath, Oscar had time to reflect on the hushed conversation he'd heard between the Emporium employees. What was it they'd said? Something about the parts looking too real? It was hard to see why that would be a problem. The more lifelike, the better, right? Still, the way they'd all backed away from it, something definitely wasn't right about it. Raj and Isaac knelt next to him. They were staring at their illegally obtained plush trap chaser. Raj glanced at Oscar. "Are we going to open it?" Were they? They'd come this far. Was Oscar really going to let some disgruntled employees at the saddest toy store on Earth keep him from the plush trap chaser now? After he'd finally seized the day? After he'd finally plucked the fruits of his labor? "Dude, are we opening this thing or not?" asked Raj. "Okay," Oscar said. "Let's see what this beast can do." It took some doing to get the thing out of its box. The molded plastic case should have formed a protective shell over the toy that had been crushed along with the rest of the packaging, and it was now almost one with the toy itself. The plastic wedged into every joint of the rabbit's arms and legs. The twist ties that had secured it to the mold had been bent into hard knots that needed to be carefully unwound, and between the smeared and tired marked lettering, the instructions were essentially illegible. Once the boys had finally freed it from its packaging, Oscar stood the plush trap chaser on its oversized feet and straightened the joints at the knees to stabilize it. The toy was relatively light considering the machinery that had to be behind it. The heaviest parts of the rabbits were in weighted feet, presumably for ease of movement and balance, and its head, presumably for ease of chomping. "I don't know why, but it's not exactly how I imagined it," Raj said. And Oscar and Isaac were quiet, which meant silent, if reluctant, agreement. They didn't mean it in a snobbish way, though. Oscar had received more than his share of lightly damaged or refurbished toys, the byproduct of having more wants than money. And though Raj and Isaac could afford more, they never held that over Oscar's head. It was more like nothing could possibly live up to the hype that had preceded the release of this toy that, let's face it, didn't do much of anything. It ran fast, and it chomped fast. The simplicity, the plainness of its functionality had appealed to Oscar, but more than that, the plush trap was wanted. It was what everyone would have that year. It was what only the unlucky, the consistently passed over, would just have to go without. Oscar couldn't have been that kid again. He just couldn't. Is it me, or do the teeth look wrong?" Isaac pointed at the straight, slightly yellow, human-looking teeth that were visible through Plushtrap's partly open mouth. "No doubt about it, they look real." Oscar had to admit the teeth looked a bit off, definitely not like the ones he'd seen in the ads, or the ones he saw Miss Beastly buy. "Yeah, they're not pointed," Raj said. "Why aren't they pointed?" Oscar didn't volunteer anything. "They're not pointed, but they're creepy," Isaac said. "They look..." He swallowed. "Human." "Yeah," Raj said, "they do. Weird." "And what's with the eyes?" Isaac said. He reached out and poked one of the cloudy green eyes. "Ew!" He whipped his hand back and flicked his finger. "It's squishy." There was no denying it. Whatever was wrong with this Plushtrap's teeth and eyes was definitely what the employees were discussing in the back of the store. Still, Oscar thought, there's no way the parts could be real. He'd seen the eyeball when Isaac touched it, though. There was the tiniest give, like if he'd pressed on a peeled grape. There was no tap from his fingernail like there should have been on hard plastic. And then there were the teeth. "That's why they were so freaked out," Oscar mumbled, and he only realized he'd said that last bit aloud when Raj and Isaac turned to stare at him. This is my punishment, Oscar thought. This is what I get for being an idiot and stealing this stupid toy. "Okay, so I've got to tell you something I overheard in the store," Oscar said at the end of a long, pained sigh. "How did you overhear anything in there?" Isaac said, focusing on the wrong question. Oscar shook his head. "Near the back room, these employees, they were all standing around the box, talking about how it had been returned, and how they should call the cops because the eyes and teeth are human," Raj blurted, as though his wildest morbid imaginings had come true. Yeah," said Oscar. "I guess when you say it out loud like that, it sounds a little ridiculous." "Yeah, completely ridiculous," Raj said, eyeing the plush trap chaser. "Totally," Isaac said, scooting a couple inches from the toy. "I mean, it's not like any one of us really got a good look at one close up," reasoned Oscar. "They're probably all nightmarish," guessed Isaac. Raj turned to Oscar. "You managed to steal us the only plush trap chaser that looks like a half-human hybrid." "I think its eyes are following me," said Isaac. "Maybe if we see it in action, we'll feel better," Oscar said, trying to reboot everyone's enthusiasm. Raj shrugged. "Why not?" Isaac shrugged too, but then he held up the marred instructions. "I think we're on our own." "Let's see what those human teeth can do," Raj said. Isaac shivered. Stop calling them that. Oscar tried pulling at the plush trap's chin, but the jaw wouldn't budge. The mouth was only open enough to glimpse the human-like teeth, but it wouldn't open any further. Maybe if you push from its nose, Raj said, gripping the top half of the rabbit's face, while Oscar continued to pull on the jaw. Here, you need more leverage, Isaac said, taking the rabbit's whiskers in his fists and yanking. Dude, you're gonna rip its face off, Oscar said, and stopped pulling a little too fast, sending Raj and Isaac rocking back on their heels. We just need something to pry it open, he said, trotting to the kitchen to grab a butter knife from the drawer. When he returned, he jammed the flat end of the knife into the partially opened mouth. But when he pressed on the knife, the thin metal gave suddenly, and the tip of the knife broke off inside the rabbit's mouth. The pointed end seemed to be stuck in its weird teeth. Whoa, Raj said. Tell me it didn't just take the bite out of a knife. Oscar looked at him, once again tiring of the struggle the toy was bringing. The payoff of his actions was becoming more elusive by the minute. It didn't bite the knife, Raj, I broke it. Maybe it just needs to be turned on before it'll open, Isaac said, and finally one of them was speaking clearly. Oscar and the boys parted the fur on the back of the animatronic, searching for a switch to indicate it was off. All they found was a line of Velcro closed over a battery compartment, complete with one rectangular 9-volt battery tucked into its place. Below the battery compartment was a pattern of small holes. Is that a speaker? Asked Isaac. Hang on, it talks? Nah, Raj dismissed, not in any of the ads. His brow crinkled. What does a rabbit even sound like? Gentlemen, focus, we're looking for the power switch. Check its feet, Oscar said. And sure enough, when they turned it over, a little black switch pointed to the on position. Okay, Isaac said, and he reached for the switch, flicking it off, then on, then off again. Maybe it just needs another battery, Raj said. And that sounded like as good a reason as any. Oscar returned to the kitchen and rummaged through the junk drawer, sifting past rubber bands and orange juice coupons until he found an opened package of 9-volt batteries, with one left in the box. Try this one, Oscar said, hustling back to the living room. The boys plucked the existing battery from its place, scraping away the little bit of white crust that had corroded at the inside. They placed the new battery in the compartment and closed the cover. Raj slapped his hands together and rubbed. This is it! Oscar picked the rabbit up and flipped the switch on, but the plush trap remained dormant, its mouth locked in a mostly closed position. Oh, come on, Isaac complained, the stress of the day clearly beginning to have an effect. Hang on, Oscar said, doing his best to calm the room. He was turning the box over and over in his hands, and there were, in bold letters inside a comic book-style POW burst, was a critical detail. Walks in the dark, freezes in the light. Guys, it only works when the lights are off, Oscar said, and his heart filled with the tiniest bit of hope that all wasn't lost. Oh, Raj and Isaac said in unison, as though it made perfect sense. Of course, somehow they'd all managed to forget this one crucial detail. The boys got right to work pulling drapes shut and flicking lights off, surrounding the bunny in as much darkness as possible. But enough daylight still seeped through the curtains to illuminate the disappointment on their faces. The plush trap chaser would chase nothing. It's just not dark enough yet, Isaac said. It probably has to charge or something, Raj offered. But when neither Isaac nor Raj lobbied to take the plush trap home for the night, the last of Oscar's hope evaporated, leaving his insides feeling dry and cracked. It was just like everything else. He'd had the nerve to think something good might come his way. He'd even done the one thing he swore to himself and to his mom, and to anyone whose opinion ever mattered to him, that he'd never do. He'd stolen. All for the tiny drop of what could have been a taste, just a taste of good fortune. Now he was left without 1/3 of $80, without one plush trap chaser, and maybe even on the verge of losing the 2 friends who'd stuck their necks out for him when his thirst had become too great. Oscar's mom called that night. Anything exciting happened today? She asked, the same question she always asked when she was at work and he was at home, feeding himself dinner and putting himself to bed while she worked the night shift and took care of old people. Nothing at all, he said, just like he always did. Only this time it hurt so much more to say it because something exciting had happened, and then it hadn't. Oscar woke to the smell of coffee like he did most mornings. His mom practically lived off the stuff. How she even got home at 3 in the morning and woke up at 7, Oscar had never been able to figure out. When he rolled out of bed, he was momentarily startled by the gooey-looking eyes swimming in the gaping hollows of a green, furry face. They really did look human. "Whoa, hey there, creeper," he said to the plush trap. The rabbit stood at attention by his bedside, right where he'd left it last night, the tiny shard of a butter knife tip still stuck in between two of the visible incisors. But just like yesterday, it did absolutely nothing. Not that it should, given the daylight streaming in through the thin curtains behind Oscar's bed. It was possible he'd gone to bed with the hope that a night in his dark room would charge whatever power source hadn't been triggered by the boys the day before. It was just another stupid hope, though. Oscar shuffled down the hall in his flannel pants and kissed his mom on the cheek like he always did. If Raj and Isaac ever saw him do that, they'd never let him forget it, but Oscar knew what it meant to his mom, and he didn't mind it so much. After his dad died, Oscar took up the habit without his mom ever asking. When he was too short to reach her head, he'd kissed her elbow, then her shoulder. It was just a peck, hardly even a kiss, given that Oscar tucked his lips into his mouth, but disappointing his mom wasn't really an option. After Oscar poured himself a glass of juice and a bowl of sugar flakes, he munched away as usual until he finally looked up and noticed his mom hadn't said a word to him. She was looking down at the newspaper they still delivered every morning because, as she put it, a subscription was cheaper than a smartphone plan. She hadn't even looked up for a second. His stomach instinctively dropped. "What's up?" he said, his voice pitched a little higher than usual. His mom slurped her coffee slowly before pulling her mug away from her mouth, her head still down. "Seems there was some sort of incident at the mall yesterday afternoon." Oscar didn't think it was possible for his stomach to sink any lower, but it found a new depth in a hurry. "Oh, yeah?" he said, shoving a mound of sugar flakes into his mouth and doing his best not to throw it right back up. "Mm-hmm," his mom said. "Says here the Emporium had to call security and everything," she said, taking another sip of coffee. "Oh, wow," Oscar said, spooning more sugar flakes into his mouth, even though he wasn't finished chewing the first spoonful. "All over some stupid toy. Apparently a couple of kids even made off with one during the commotion." Then Oscar's mom did look up, fixing her dark brown eyes on Oscar's. People were always telling him how much they looked alike, with their smooth features and eyes like coal. "Can you believe that?" she said, and Oscar understood that she was asking exactly that, if he could believe it, because if he knew anything about it, anything at all, it wouldn't be so hard to believe it was true. "Irvin mentioned something about you boys heading to the mall yesterday," she said, giving Oscar so many chances not to lie. She opened every single door to the truth, inviting Oscar to walk through, to be honest. She was begging him not to disappoint her. But it was just not Oscar's lie to protect anymore. Oscar had made sure of that when he dragged Raj and Isaac along with him. So Oscar made a decision. He disappointed his mom to save his friends. "Must have been after we got there," Oscar said. Then he shrugged. A period on the end of the lie. Oscar's mom stared at him for a long while, and he thought maybe he could apologize without saying a word. He hoped his mom could hear it. Instead, she finally released his gaze and drained the last drop of coffee from her mug, folded the paper over itself, and threw it into the recycling bin without another word. Oscar had never felt smaller. He spent the rest of the day at home, avoiding Raj's calls and pretending he didn't hear Isaac knocking at his door. He lay in bed instead, staring at the bulging eyes of the plush trap while it stared back at him. "You're worse than useless," he said to it. Or maybe he said it to himself. The next few days passed by Oscar in a blur, and finally Isaac and Raj confronted him in the cafeteria. "Look, if you're possessed, we'll understand, okay?" Isaac said. "Just blink twice if you need help." "Come on, man, if you're trapped in there, let us know," Raj said, nodding with Isaac. "I'm not possessed," Oscar said, but he couldn't make himself smile. "Dude, if this is still about the plush trap thing," Isaac said, and Oscar thought that was a funny way of referring to a misdemeanor. "It's not just that," Oscar said, and Raj and Isaac got quiet. Oscar figured they probably understood. They'd been friends long enough for them to notice that Oscar's shoes never had the right logo, that his backpack had to last 2 school years instead of 1. "First-generation technology is always bogus anyway," Raj said. "We'll save up for Gen 2. It'll give them a couple chances to work out the bugs." Isaac nodded, and Oscar actually did feel better. They didn't hate him. He was down a mom and a plush trap, but he was up 2 friends. Things were starting to even out. That's probably what made the thing he had to say next even harder. I've got to take it back. Isaac put his palm to his forehead, and Raj just closed his eyes. Clearly they'd seen this coming. With those eyes and those teeth in it, Raj said, "Come on, dude, just let it go." "I can't, my mom knows." They both looked up. "How are you even alive?" asked Isaac. "I mean, she didn't say she knows, but she knows," said Oscar. "What good will it even do?" asked Raj. "It's busted. Our money's already gone, and do you really want to answer questions about those, upgrades?" Raj and Isaac looked around to make sure no one had heard. Oscar understood. It was bad enough owning up to the theft. Raj was right. He absolutely did not want to answer any questions about the eerily human eyes and the set of matching human teeth. Which is still impossible, Oscar told himself, even though he hadn't mustered the courage to touch the eyes for himself, and swore that last night those same eyes had followed him across the room. He shook off the memory. "That isn't the point," Oscar said. And Raj and Isaac couldn't say anything because they knew it was true. It wasn't about the money or the toy. It was about the taking. And Oscar wasn't the taker. None of them were. "You guys don't have to come," he said. "I was the one who did it." But Raj and Isaac just sighed and looked at their shoes. And Oscar knew he wouldn't be walking to the mall himself that afternoon. His friends would be there with him. "You're an idiot," said Isaac. "I know." For some reason, the box felt heavier in Oscar's hands on the way back to the mall. Maybe it was because of all the money they'd sunk into it. "What if we see those security guards again?" Isaac asked, and they just stopped right outside the doors to the east entrance. Raj shook his head. "What are they going to do, arrest us for returning what we stole?" "Good point," Isaac said, and they began the slow walk to the Emporium. But when they arrived, the Emporium was gone. "What?" Oscar whispered, as he read and reread the big orange letters lighting the place above the glass doors that used to be yellow. Now they spelled Hal's Halloween Hallway. "Did we come in the wrong entrance?" Raj asked. But they all knew they hadn't. Any doubts that remained were laid to rest the minute they walked through the door. The same stained and grimy floor spread the length of the store, but now, instead of shelves lined with dusty toys and dark spaces, every sort of Halloween accoutrement spilled from the metal racks. There was an aisle for decorations and lights, another for party favors, 2 for candy, and what looked to be 5 or 6 aisles crammed with every sort of costume, from murderous slashers to sparkly princesses. "Did we fall through a wormhole or something?" Isaac asked, scratching the back of his neck. "Hey guys, look," Raj chuckled, pulling a green plush trap chaser costume from the rack and holding it against him. "Dude, seriously?" Isaac said, yanking the costume from Raj's hand and replacing it. Oscar made his way to the cashier's counter at the front of the store, the scene of humanity's meltdown not even a week ago. "Where's the Emporium?" asked Oscar in a daze. The girl behind the counter wore a pair of yellow antennae on long springs that bounced when she looked down from her perch at Oscar. "The what?" "The store that was here before," Oscar said. "Oh, yeah," she said, without answering the question, not apparently caring to. "Where'd it go?" Oscar asked. "Not a clue," the girl said, returning to the screen of her phone. "I just filled out an application, and poof," she said. "Here I am." "But I need to return this," said Oscar, suddenly feeling very young and small next to this older girl. She looked back down at him, and her eyes widened just enough to know that he'd finally got her attention. It only lasted a second, though. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked, looking at her screen again. "Why would you want to return it? You could sell that thing for a fortune." It's not mine," Oscar said, looking down. When he looked back up, the girl had lifted the eyebrow closest to him. "It is now." Oscar looked back down at the box in his hands, the cardboard looking more crinkled than before. When he rejoined Raj and Isaac, they were decked out fully in hockey masks and pixie wings. "I'm going for a kind of murderous fairy vibe," said Raj. "I can't return it," Oscar said. And Isaac and Raj lifted their masks. "Well, no one can say we didn't try, right?" Raj said. "Maybe it's for the best," said Isaac. But he didn't follow it up with anything, so Oscar knew he couldn't think of a reason why. 10 minutes and 3 sets of pixie wings and hockey masks later, the boys headed back to Oscar's house to devise a plan for trick-or-treating. Every year they vowed to make it to the other side of the train tracks, where the good candy was rumored to be. Every year they ran out of time, distracted by the false promise of the good stuff closer by. We fall for it every time, Raj said. Not this year. This year we start on the other side of the tracks and we work our way back. Oscar and Isaac agreed. It was a good plan. The plan set, Raj and Isaac fell deep into a match to the death on Raj's newest console game, taking turns after wiping palm sweat from the controls before each turn. You're going down, Raj said, but his thumbs jammed furiously at the buttons while Isaac sat back smiling. Every time, Isaac said. You say it every time. One day you're just going to have to admit. You're not the champion, Raj said, beads of sweat forming on his brow. Oscar was barely paying attention, though. He was chiseling away at the remaining battery leakage from the compartment on the back of the plush trap chaser. The wind was picking up outside, and it looked like the storm the news had been blathering on about for the last week was finally going to hit. The electricity kept flickering on and off, which was only contributing more to Raj's losing streak. Come on, it doesn't count if the power goes out, Raj complained. I don't make the rules, Isaac said, smug in his luck. It had to make Raj even angrier that the game was his. So was the console. He should be better at it, except they were mostly kept it plugged in at Oscar's because he was the only one without siblings hanging around begging to play. Oscar wasn't interested in video games right then, though. Oscar, help me out here? Power outages warrant a redo, don't they? Raj asked, while they waited for the power to come back on. The light outside was fading fast. Oscar asked. He'd tried scraping away the rest of the gunk, swapping out the battery for one in the little fan that sat on his mom's bedside table, even turning the battery around to face the opposite charge, hoping maybe it was a manufacturing defect. Nothing powered the plush trap chaser, though. Why are you still messing around with that? Isaac asked, clearly tired of the drama it had brought the last few days. He's right, Raj said in a rare moment of agreement. It's hopeless, Oscar. Just let it go. I think we should literally let it go, Isaac said, as in, get rid of it. He twisted his mouth for a second. It's not just broken, it's, I don't know, just wrong. Oscar didn't disagree, but he wasn't going to admit it. He ignored Isaac, and he ignored Raj too, but Oscar didn't feel like it was hopeless. They'd gotten away from mall security, he'd kept the truth from his mom, they'd tried to do the right thing and return it. It was like there was some reason he had to keep this thing. He flipped it over and stared into the murky, glistening green eyes of the ugly rabbit. If you're possessed, blink twice, he said to the bunny, chuckling quietly. But while the plush trap didn't blink, it emitted a sound, a sort of quiet chirp, so fast it might not have happened at all. Did you guys hear that? Hear what? Asked Raj. The power flickered back on, and the video game resumed, along with Raj and Isaac's arguing as they continued their tournament to the death. Then, just as Oscar was getting ready to flip the rabbit over again and take his 1000th look at the battery compartment, he spotted a tiny hole at the side of the rabbit's metal jaw. At first, it looked like nothing but a bolt holding together the hinge of the lower jaw. From this angle, though, Oscar could see it wasn't a bolt at all. It was a port. Oscar's house phone began to ring as the lights flickered again. With the plush trap still in his hands, Oscar ran to the kitchen to catch the call before the machine picked up. Even if they could afford 2 phone plans, Oscar's mom would have insisted on keeping a landline. She was big on backup systems. The line was crackly, and it took Oscar asking 3 times who it was before he could clearly hear his mom's voice. Ugh, this storm, his mom said. How about now? Yeah, I can hear you, Oscar said, barely listening. He was trying to get a closer look at the port on the plush trap, but it was hard when the light in the kitchen kept blinking. LM, I need your help tomorrow, she said. Sure, Mom, he said, not listening. I'm sorry to ask. You know how much I hate asking. It's just that with the storm tonight, we've had so many people call in sick. We're going to be completely backed up on laundry and charts tomorrow, and... Are you listening? Uh-huh, Oscar lied, but it suddenly dawned on him why she was so apologetic. Wait, no, Mom, not tomorrow. I knew you'd be upset, hon, but it's... Mom, tomorrow is Halloween, Oscar said, suddenly panicked at what he'd agreed to. Not that he'd have much in a say in the matter either. I realize that, but, sweetie, aren't you and your friends a little old to be... No, why do you always do that? Oscar said, taking it a little too far, but now it was too late. Do what? Oscar could barely hear his mom now. The storm was encroaching on the phone lines and rattling the house from the outside. Maybe it was the fact that she sounded so far away that made Oscar feel like he could say what he said next. You act like I'm older, like I should be just like you, like I should be just like Dad. You never let me be a kid. Dad died and you expected me to just grow up. Oscar, I stole it, okay? I stole a stupid plush trap toy. Your little man stole it, Oscar said, and he knew it was cruel, but he was just so angry because it was happening again. Once again, he was missing out on what everyone else got to enjoy. The lights blinked off and on in the kitchen, and suddenly his mom was gone. Mom? But all that greeted him was silence, then the echo of his own breath, and finally, the rapid tone of the circuit's busy signal. Oscar walked slowly back to his room, just in time to watch Isaac put the finishing moves on Raj's fighter. All Oscar could do, though, was stare at the tiny port by the plush trap's jaw. The damage of what he might have just done to his mother was too much to contemplate all at once. Raj, I need your cell phone charger, Oscar said. What? Right now? I was just catching up, he said, pointing to the screen. No, you weren't, Oscar said. Listen to the man, Isaac said. He speaks the truth. Oscar flinched to the reference of him as a man, and followed Raj to the hallway, where he fished a knotted cord from a drawer and handed it to Oscar. Oscar knew it was a kindness of Raj not to ask why he needed a phone charger for if he didn't have a phone, but Raj was still following Oscar's motions with interest. Back in Oscar's room, Isaac had Raj's fighter's HP down to 10%. Oscar took a small breath and held it, then brought the charger's A connector to the hole in the plush trap's head. When the plug fit snugly in place, Oscar exhaled. This is it, Raj. I'm putting you out of your misery in 3... The sound of Isaac's fighter powering up for his death move pulsed in Oscar's ears as he marched the plush trap and charger to the outlet across the room. 2, said Isaac, as the lights began to flicker overhead. Just get it over with, Raj said miserably. And you're dead. Oscar didn't remember plugging the adapter into the wall. He didn't remember the lights going out or Isaac's fighter winning the golden belt. If he was pressed, he might not be able to remember his own name. All he knew for the moment was that the room was dark, and he was on the other side of it. What the... he could hear Isaac say. Do you smell burning? He could hear Raj say. Oh man, Oscar, Isaac said. Oscar, said Raj. Oscar couldn't understand why they seemed so panicked. He could barely make out the outline of their heads in the moonlight that illuminated the room in flicks and whips, while the tree branches outside waved under the storm. Oscar, how many fingers am I holding up? Said Raj. You're not holding anything up, Isaac said, and Raj shook his head. Right, sorry. I'm fine, Oscar said, not certain that was true, but he was getting weirded out with them acting so worried about him. What's wrong with you guys? Do you not remember soaring across the room? Raj said, and they looked even more worried now. Knock it off, Oscar dismissed, using the wall for support as he struggled to get back to his feet. His head felt like it was stuck in a fish tank. We're not messing with you, Isaac said, and a closer look at their faces told Oscar it was true. 1 minute you're plugging in the charger, the next minute you're airborne. I think it was the lightning. And that's where we're going to have to leave it off for now. I know, sorry, but I want to save the best parts for part 3, and that starts like right now. Things are about to get real crazy. I say that all the time with these audiobooks, but that's because it's true. It's almost time for the finale of Fetch, so get ready. Oh, and once again, there's a teaser at the end of the story. So if you stick around, there's a teaser for, I don't know, next game, next book. It's not really clear yet. It's actually part 2 of a teaser that we also got in Into the Pit at the end of that book. So if you haven't read that, then you probably should before you read this one. Yeah, alright, goodbye.